about U.S. taxpayer dollars going to the Chinese Communist Party and a little bit of a focus on Gotion. But before that, I've been working this issue for a number of years. In 2000, I actually voted against giving China permanent normal trade relations because I was concerned about China's behavior. The good news is a lot of progress is being made across a wide range of fronts. I worked this issue in the Netherlands. The Dutch announced in the last few days that ASML, the leading chip manufacturer, they make the machines that make chips, and they make the most advanced technology in the world. And the Dutch have consistently tightened the restrictions that they have put in place for transferring that technology to China. The Chinese over the weekend announced that they're disappointed. Of course they are. They want our technology, they want to steal it, but this is an international problem that I've worked on when I was overseas. Obviously, at the federal level, we're very, very concerned about the votes that Kamala Harris, Slotkin, Scholten passed for the Inflation, quote-unquote, Reduction Act, which authorizes the transfer potentially of billions of dollars to Chinese Communist Party affiliated companies. Even though so many people, Republican and Democrats in Washington and part of our national security infrastructure, have said China is a threat to our national security. And then you come to Michigan, where it appears that the Democratic Party here has provided a safe zone for Chinese Communist Party affiliated companies to receive taxpayer incentives going into the billions of dollars. Incentives that will jeopardize American jobs and will potentially devastate the auto industry here in Michigan. The bedrock of our economy, and Whitmer, Slotkin, Scholten, they're providing the incentives that enable the Chinese Communist Party to come in and destroy our auto industry. And you say, come on, Pete. No, it's exactly what's happening in Europe. Europe's auto industry today, the biggest threat that the Europeans are seeing is from Chinese electric vehicles using predatory pricing, coming in and devastating the auto industry in Europe. Volkswagen announced within the last week or two that for the first time since 1994, they're looking at laying off workers and potentially closing plants in Europe because of the threat from the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese government, and the Chinese auto industry. And you say all three of those, and they are closely linked together. They're one and the same. If we continue making Michigan a safe zone for the Chinese Communist Party, the headlines that you're seeing about the auto industry in Europe are the headlines that we will be reading about here in the state of Michigan, because that's what's going to happen to our auto industry. This is about protecting our national security and protecting American jobs. I'm joined today by a former colleague, Joe Sella, an ambassador, Tom Barrett, our candidate for Congress, and my former colleague in the House, and he and I both shared the same job, the chairman of the Intelligence Committee in the House of Representatives, because we all share exactly the same concerns about the threat to our national security and our economic security posed by the Chinese Communist Party. Joe, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Pete. It's a delight to be here with my friends and esteemed colleagues, former colleague Pete, and thank you for your service to our country. Tom, as an Army combat pilot, Mike, the FBI, Army, Congress, and Pete in Army and the State Department, not Army, and Congress. So, but But the Michigan China Economic Security Review Group launched 19 months ago to monitor, assess, counter, and report on the threats of subnational incursions from the People's Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party to protect the security of the state of Michigan, and certainly the national security and economic security of the United States of America. This would not have been possible without those that have the hardest of job on the front lines against Gotion, everyday American citizens, activists on the front lines in Greene Township and Mecosta County, and those in Marshall Township and the city of Marshall against cattle in Calhoun County. Certainly this 100% volunteer and citizen-driven work would not have also been possible without my former good colleague, Mr. Hoekstra, who co-founded the group with me, and it's been certainly been a blessing to work with them. As we began serving as ambassadors to the United States of America, for the United States of America, we immediately faced head-on the manifestations of how the People's Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party are grave national security threats to the U.S. and our allies. China represents the gravest of threats our republic has faced in its history. As we navigate this Cold War, all 50 states are targeted by this threat. Not too long after arriving home, we observed the storm clouds gathering over the United States through subnational incursions and influence operations by the PRC and the CCP, including on our beloved and beautiful home state of Michigan. Michigan citizens are fighting against government and business elites led by Governor Whitmer, the MEDC, the Right Place, the Marshall Area Economic Development Alliance, Ferris State University, and Ford Motor Company. Some in our congressional delegation, including Alyssa Slotkin, and others in the Michigan legislature, and certainly local elected officials. These deals governed by these elites have been moving fast and in secret, and are all in and at any cost high-risk ventures, multi-billion-dollar deals with these two companies based in the PRC who have deep ties to the Chinese Communist Party. These deals are corrupted from head to tail. They have been ill-conceived and ill-executed and handled recklessly. This comes at a critical time when China is on the hunt for such deals to execute subnational incursions and influence operations. The corruptness of these deals began with mandating binding and punitive non-disclosure agreements wrapped in silly secret code names. This ruptured the consent of the governed, where elected officials wouldn't even answer the questions of their colleagues, let alone their constituents, that they had about these deals. All of this careened forward after our national security and intelligence agencies convened a bipartisan group of state and local elected officials and business executives warning them about subnational incursions and influence operations by the PRC and the CCP through these seemingly benign business deals with companies such as Gotion and Cattle, directing them to, quote, specifically exercise vigilance, conduct due diligence, and ensure transparency, integrity, and accountability are built into the partnership to guard against potential foreign government exploitation. These elites defied this direction, found in this declassified memo, averted their eyes, and performed zero strict scrutiny and zero due diligence. I have this memo, and I can share with you the link to it on its website. I will parenthetically add, with Congressman Slotkin signing the NDA as a former CIA agent and Defense Department official, she well knew the threat of the Chinese Communist Party and exercised a gross lack of prudential judgment by signing the NDA. Testifying in a hearing before the Michigan Senate and comments in the media last year, MEDC CEO Quentin Messer and MEDC Chief Project Officer Joshua Hunt said due diligence and exhaustive due diligence were done and based on the judgments of Gotion's, quote, business credibility, quote unquote, company credibility, and quote unquote, public board meetings and approvals, while casually expressing, we feel good about this company. All of that was patently not true. Messer and Hunt later only acknowledged a due diligence failure, saying essentially, we'll do better next time. After Gotion was found allegedly to be an uncovered transaction by the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, otherwise known as CFIUS, that is governed by the Department of Treasury, Messer stated to the media that the backlash to Gotion prompted his office to add, quote, more scrutiny to reviews of projects, and stated that they are now asking more questions about international ownership connections, quote, in a much more intentional and consistent manner because of geopolitical events changing. This is way, way too late after nearly $1 billion was committed to a PRC-based and CCP-tied company. The Township Board has rightfully been recalled on account of this. Congressman John Molinar has introduced the No Gotion Act. Multiple branches of government on the federal and state level are tracking this imperiled project very closely, and more will soon be known about this corrupted deal. Last year, separately involving the cattle project, in a letter to Ford CEO Jim Farley, the Committee on Ways and Means and the Committee on Energy and Commerce sent an initial query to him about the deal with PRC-based and CCP-tied cattle, did not provide the level of detail sought by the committee, further asking for information about the partnership agreement with cattle and, quote, Ford's knowledge of cattle parent's attempt to shield its connection to Xinjiang-based companies. 3 congressional committees continue to look into this deal. The state of Michigan has clawed back $750 million out of the blue to it, and those involved with the project suggest that Ford is ultimately going to move this deal to Mexico on account of the scrutiny. In recent months, Congress, working closely with the Pentagon and with the full support passed the National Defense Appropriation Act that prohibits the Department of Defense from procuring battery systems from Gotion and cattle on account of the national security threat that the equipment presents. In recent days, the Treasury Department, with support of the Defense Department, included Camp Grayling, otherwise known as the National All-Domain Warfighting Center, where we train Taiwanese troops annually, likely on account of input from military and other departments, the mission-critical assets present, and its proximity to the proposed Gotion location. I'll add parenthetically that Camp Lejeune in North Carolina removed cattle battery packs there on account of the national security threat over the last few months. I'll conclude with this. Before coming out, I transmitted a letter to Mr. Paul Rosen, the Assistant Secretary of State of the Treasury for Investment, flagging the Department of Treasury that as it appears that they may have overlooked or avoided considering a regulation implemented by the Trump administration in February of 2020 to include the Camp Grayling airfield when reviewing relevant transactions. I've respectfully requested they re-examine Gotion's filing under the regulations governing joint-use military airfields and scrutinize the project accordingly. This letter will also be transmitted to other federal agencies, the Michigan Congressional Delegation, and the Michigan Legislature. I'll close by parenthetically, again, thanking the gentlemen for their service. I know Congressman Rogers, when at the helm in Congress, he I think at the church, when chairman of the Intel Committee, he authored a damning report on both Huawei and ZTE. So he's certainly not new to the fight, and appreciate your leadership. And Tom, appreciate your leadership, and as well as Pete. So.
Thank you. Thank you, ambassadors, and thank you, everybody in the media. Congressman, soon to be Senator, thank you for being here. Appreciate everybody's interest on this extremely important topic. We have far and away evidence of members of our government now acting in concert with agents, foreign registered agents, on behalf of Chinese government and Chinese Communist Party-backed companies here in the United States. You know, a lot has been made about non-disclosure agreements that have been signed by whether that is Curtis Hertel while he was a member of the state Senate, or Curtis Hertel while he was the chief lobbyist and legislative director for Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Alyssa Slotkin, member of Congress, and what was inherent within these non-disclosure agreements. Secret deals, secret discussions being done behind the backs of constituents and colleagues who had a right to know what these discussions were about. And instead they are done completely privately, where they can't even tell us what was done. Well, we went back and looked at the disclosures that were done on the Foreign Agent Registry Act disclosures for Gotion and for their agents here in the United States. It's important to point out, they're going to tell you that Goshen's just another run-of-the-mill, mom-and-pop, apple pie and baseball company. Well, guess what? You don't have to register under FARA if you're an American-based company. You don't have to recruit and register foreign agents if you're an American-based company. You only have to do that if you're acting in concert with foreign governments, particularly those that are adversarial to the interests of the United States. Now, I want to be fully open and candid with you because I believe in transparency. Curtis Hertel and I both signed non-disclosure agreements. His was for Gotion, for this deal that we're talking about today. Mine was called my security clearance. that I got as a member of the United States Army, something that I'm proud of and something that I'm going to take as a point of character with me to the United States Congress. My opponent in this congressional race, based on these disclosures, would be ineligible for an intelligence briefing or a security clearance if he were to go into the United States military or serve an elected government. He is running for the United States Congress in the most consequential and competitive congressional race in the country and would be ineligible for a security clearance because of what he has done. People need to bear that in mind. These threats to national security are steeper than ever before. War is breaking out across the world. We feel it and we see it. The Chinese are coming for us. We know that. They're engaging in economic warfare, warfare against adversaries of the United States. They're insidiously embedding themselves into places here and into industry, into trade, and into commerce. Tens of thousands of fighting-age men, Chinese nationals, coming across our border. We are either going to stand ready and prepared against that, or we're going to lose this generational fight and give that up for our kids and grandkids. We simply can't allow it to happen. This is far too serious of a problem. This is something that is a disqualifier for any person seeking public office to be engaged in this kind of behavior. Other than that, I have no strong opinions about it, and I'm turning it over to my friend Mike Rogers. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. All right. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Thanks for all your effort and your service, and I look forward to having you as a member of the United States House doing the people's work. It's really important we send somebody from Michigan to Washington, D.C., other than the other way around. I'm just going to recap here for a minute. If you think about what we just talked about with these three great leaders in our community. We had foreign agents provide financial support to Alyssa Slotkin, to Curtis Hertel. They signed non-disclosure agreements to talk, to not have to disclose their conversations about their dealings to give cash and prizes to a company that is now tied to the Communist Party of China. Just stop right there for a second. About $1 billion in both cash and tax incentives. So they've signed a non-disclosure agreement. They're dealing with foreign agents, right? As of signed up by FARA and listed in the report, by the way, so if the press wants a copy of that, we'll get you that. And now you have this notion of the consequences of this. So this plant has gone up to a place that doesn't want it. It's very near to a military base. Right? Oop, thank you. It's very near to a military base, which presents its own security clearance issue. And as Tom just talked about a minute ago, this in and of itself would preclude you from getting a security clearance to do any other issue and job in the United States government. So if you have come and asked for a promotion after violating what we would say the very basic tenets of national security thought and judgment, most often than not, you'd say no. I can tell you as a member of Congress for those 7 terms, never once did I see an elected official sign a non-disclosure agreement for any issue, let alone a company that is tied to the Communist Party of China. Here's the second part of that, as the ambassador was telling you earlier. They had to violate, the Democrats, the Biden administration had to violate their own rules. There are rules that said that anything that had this proximity to a military base would have to go through CFIUS. This is a process, if you're not familiar, that would take a company that has some foreign ties to make sure that it wasn't adversarial to the United States. And by the way, they said it wasn't tied to a communist party in China. The people of Big Rapids did their own research and found by their own incorporation papers that it in fact was a Chinese Communist Party affiliated company, and the president and CEO was a member of the Communist Party with close ties to President Xi. So if you just kind of recap what they just talked about here, from violating their own rules, signing secret non-disclosure agreements to make sure to facilitate the financing of almost $1 billion in cash and tax incentives, dealing with foreign agents to get all this done. and everybody staring at their navel when all of these facts started to come out. But there's something even worse than that on this. That's bad enough. That should be disqualifying enough. But the consequences of what this policy is doing to auto workers in this state, I worked in an auto plant. It helped me get the money I needed to go through college. It was almost twice as much as the minimum wage. These factory jobs are really critical to our economy, to families being able to take care of themselves. There was just a report that came out today that if fully implemented by what has been proposed by the Harris-Biden administration, supported by Alyssa Slotkin back in 23, 200,000 manufacturing auto jobs gone. Gone. You start thinking about what that does to our community here in the great state of Michigan. Right? What happens to the value of businesses who cater in these neighborhoods that produce cars? What happens to the home values of these workers who end up having to find somewhere else to go to get a job? It will ripple through our economy in a way that we have never seen in our history, because we are knowingly putting our foot on the necks of Michigan auto workers. In the FBI, you know what? We would call all of this a clue. Something ain't working for us. I'm just going to give you some of the price implications of this. So we've already seen what's going to happen with auto workers. We have already seen the fact that everybody has acknowledged, by the way, even the Biden administration says, yep, there's going to be a lot less auto workers. That's why they promised the unions money for retraining. We're talking about losing manufacturing jobs and sending money to union leadership for retraining. Right? This is by their own process. This is what they're telling you is going to happen to our community. I can't tell you how devastating this is going to be. And let me just tell you, from all of these policies, for someone who has been my opponent for the last 6 years, working with a foreign agent of a Communist Party company, signing a non-disclosure agreement with this company to give away money and benefits to them to locate into Big Rapids. The fact that the CIA director, the former CIA director under Obama, saying this is a 100% chance somebody there will be used to collect intelligence for the Chinese Communist Party. Right? We're going through this list. But here's the consequences for real people at home for all these big spending policies. The money that they threw into the economy because they were going to save America through this Green New Deal. So let me tell you what happened. Since my opponent got there in 2018, gasoline was $2.74. It's now $3.51. That's what happened. The average car price in America went from $37,500 when she got to Washington, D.C. It's now $48,400. The median rent went from $900 to $1,500. I'm meeting people every day who are telling me how the difficulty they're having paying their grocery bill. Met a woman, she works part-time, her husband works full-time, she has 4 kids. The last 3 days of the month, she said, after getting her composure from crying, she has to go to the food pantry to pay her bills. This notion that we're going to give our money to a Communist Party China company, this idea that we're going to take money from other programs. Matter of fact, they raised Medicare premiums to pay for this kind of money that ends up going to a Communist Party China company. And Michigan workers are paying that price. Stellantis, 2,400 layoffs. General Motors, 1,000 layoffs. Ford has just announced that they're going to have to close a few lines. Guess what's coming? Layoffs. We don't have to do it this way. There's a better way to do it. But when you spend your career, you go from an elite high school to an elite college in New York, to another elite college in New York City, to Washington, D.C. for the most of your adult career, you don't understand what happens when you make these decisions to people like me who worked in a factory, or my brother that was a union member at Flat Rock, or to all the auto workers in Michigan. It seems like a very easy Washington, D.C. decision to move pieces on the board. But because of these prices, because of their decisions, People who are earning a living today are afraid for their future. That's why you need to send Tom Barrett to the United States Congress. That's why you need to send Mike Rogers to the United States Senate. We will put Michigan families first in every decision. So thank you very, very much. I'll turn it back over to the chairman.
Hey, thank you. We will take whatever questions you might have. Yep.
Yes, sir. So I think we have, the one thing I think the United States did wrong is we haven't paid attention to our African allies for this reason. When you talk to the folks that are in African leadership, the one thing they'll tell you is, please help us from the onslaught of the Chinese. They come in with cash, they come in with subsidized deals, and what they find is they're not getting a good deal at the other end of it. So I agree with you 100%. I do think we need to get business involved in Africa. It's going to be important for our critical minerals needs, our natural resources needs, and it's critical for Africa because we'll allow them to come up on their own. The Chinese aren't going to do that. And so this is a huge complaint that we hear from African nations, and I argue we ought to do something about it. It's for our own national security interests and our military and national security interests that we are good partners to the African nations, and they're good partners with us. Yeah, please.
So it's an important point you raised. We've seen a lot of coverage about Afghanistan, country well familiar to us. We've just rolled over the anniversary of the tragic loss of life there in Afghanistan. They have over $1 trillion in rare earth minerals in Afghanistan. Guess who doesn't care about human rights abuses in Afghanistan? The Chinese. And they're now moving in, as we've come out, to take more and more and more of a market share of the rare earth minerals laying beneath the ground in Afghanistan. They'll use slave labor to get it out. They don't care that girls can't go to school. They don't care about the human rights abuses the Taliban's doing because they're doing the same thing in their own country. So that's what we have to stop. That's what a foreign policy of deterrence, one of strength, and one that keeps Americans in the driver's seat is so important. It's important for the economic reasons as well, but it's important for all of the other national security. As China builds out these allies, they're buying up countries one by one and using them for votes in the United Nations, using them to put people on human rights committees and everything else to distort the outcome of that. So there's a ton of stuff going on in the foreign policy space. Just as, we have this disastrous withdrawal, the Chinese move in and now they're going to have the upper hand on the trillions of rare earth minerals in Afghanistan that'll support Biden's EV mandate back here in the United States.
Yeah, let me just say that. Mike and I have the experience from Congress. I don't believe either one of us were ever even asked to sign an NDA for somebody that was going to be getting dollars from the federal government or the state government, which is exactly what Slotkin did. She signed an NDA as a congressperson. We've got experience, and that doesn't happen. Tom, you probably got more experience at the legislature.
So I had never heard of this practice ever until these SOAR funding deals were going forward. I had never, ever heard. Nobody ever approached me. Maybe they didn't think I was a soft target, as we would say in the Army, for somebody who would be susceptible to signing a non-disclosure agreement. I'm not speaking for anybody else who did. I'm here to stand on my own merit. My name's on the ballot for Congress. Another name on the ballot for Congress is a guy who did sign an NDA. Oh, and by the way, is disclosed in conversation with agents for Gotion right here. Not just signed an NDA and walked away. Signed the NDA, engaged in conversation and text messages and meetings with them, fully making himself incapable of even getting a routine security clearance today. So I'm not here to talk about it. You can ask whomever else signed a non-disclosure agreement on them. I learned a few lessons in life. One is I can influence other people. I can only control myself. As I said, the only non-disclosure agreement I ever signed in my life was for my security clearance in the United States Army, and that's how it's going to stay relative to these shady deals like this one. I don't support any person signing a non-disclosure agreement with a Chinese-backed Communist Party affiliated company. Full stop. Like, I don't support that from anyone. However, I am focused right now in this critical juncture. The outcome that is going to be decided in the next 57 days is who we're going to elect to these offices to choose what track we're going to go down. Are we going to give the Chinese a free pass to keep going like they are? Or are we going to elect new leadership, Mike Rogers, myself, to go in and hold them to task and hold them accountable for the decisions they've made? But I will tell you, I don't support any individual in elected office signing a non-disclosure agreement with a known adversary of the United States, regardless of who they are.
Craig, to your point, as you know, these deals have been hushed and rushed from the outset, again, through the NDAs. And the business elites and the government elites that were involved, no matter the party, defied the direction given to them, given to all of us as Americans, to protect our national security, to abide by certain practices. They defied them entirely. NDAs are not transparent, yet the agencies called for transparency. Former CIA director, I think Panetta, referenced by Mike earlier, in July he testified before the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, and Congressman Molinar asked, well, what do you think the chances of espionage through PRC nationals at Gotion? And he said it's high, and he says, I think you better know what the hell is going on before you do it. And with NDAs, you can't figure out what the hell is going on. So it's a shrouding, and it's an unhealthy shrouding that prevents us from providing for our common defense and our national security.
I think we're probably united that we believe in public service where you're dealing with taxpayer money. NDAs are just bad policy, especially when you're dealing with the Chinese Communist Party.
National security is a bipartisan matter and must always be nonpartisan.
Yeah, again, it should tell you everything you need to know that certainly my opponent has now trying to back out of the fact that she signed an NDA and now is concerned about the security of this thing. It tells you the significance of the security violations that I believe have happened getting up to this point, including not following their own rule at Treasury that says this had to be CFIUS reviewed, and CFIUS is the one thing that protects Americans and workers from a illegally subsidized Communist Party affiliated company coming into the state of Michigan. And so I think this notion of NDAs, everybody should have to explain themselves, and I don't care what party you're in, and when especially when you hang yourself out there as a national security expert and then sign an NDA and then hide about it for the next 2 years. That tells me everything we need to know about why that person ought not to get promoted.
So I don't think, a company that's going to China to get some, trinket made that you buy at the Dollar Tree for your kid's tooth fairy gift is the same as colluding with a Chinese communist-backed company that Leon Panetta, Barack Obama's own CIA director, condemned, saying it would be used for espionage against the United States within a stone's throw of a military base where I flew into countless of times, still have colleagues that are serving in that unit that flies up there. I take it a little bit personally when we have people actively engaging in ways to promote that type of behavior on our homeland. That crosses a line, and that's what we're speaking to today. First and foremost, the national security threats that are present with this. Bringing and inviting a Chinese communist-backed company here that's already been condemned by national security experts of Barack Obama's own administration, and not just bringing them here, allowing them to come, but paying them for the privilege of spying on us. That's a line that we should never cross and one that we stand against.
It's really important to understand how the Chinese operate. So they have sectors of the American economy that they break out that they want to compete. And they've done this for 20 years. And so it tends to be things that we could use to either advance them economically or advance them militarily or in our national defense. the automobile industry has always been a target for China to beat the United States, right? This is why this is so important. And so when you take a technology that they developed, by the way, it was developed in America, most likely the intellectual property of that drifted off to China, and you can only imagine how many ways that can happen. They used state subsidies to build and advance that technology, and now they're going to bring that technology because our delegations in this state were absolutely complicit in having that happen to compete against the U.S. car company. And by the way, when they're successful at their plan, 200,000 less auto worker jobs. That's if they're successful. We're going to hope that they're not successful in this, they being the Chinese and Democrats both in Washington and here in our state. They have not thought of the second and third order effects. So they'll take that sector of the economy and compete against us. That's why CFIUS was there to protect this ability for a Chinese Communist Party to take state funds and tax credits and locate in a town that doesn't want it, delivering a product that will cost Michigan jobs. That's why you have CFIUS. And for them to purposely go around it and then sign NDAs because they didn't want to have to talk about the fact that they went around CFIUS, and oh, by the way, we gave them money, is exactly what the crux of this problem is. And it shows you the lengths that they will go without considering the consequences or having voter transparency. That's why this is so important.
I was going to just say your question. There are processes in place to handle a very difficult question. The MEDC, by its own words, has said we didn't do our job to help answer that question. CFIUS, by bypassing everything in CFIUS, the federal government hasn't done what it's supposed to do to answer those questions. But it's interesting. The grassroots folks up in Greene Township and in Marshall, they found the answers. You go through this whole process. Now it appears that after signing an NDA and having more information than almost anybody else, 2 years later, Slotkin has found the answer. Maybe this isn't a good deal, but for 2.5 years, Harris, Whitmer, Slotkin, Skolton have all been pushing this project. Hertel has been pushing this project. And now all of a sudden, you know, they were there to push the money. They didn't fight to stop it. When the folks in Greene Township were being recalled, they were supporting Gotion. Skolton, within the last couple of weeks, is still saying, this is a great deal for America. This is absolutely crazy. Every safeguard that was put in place to answer your question has been bypassed through this process. And that's how we find ourselves in this position today. One last question. Yeah. You know, selling our industry, whether selling the automobile industry off to the Chinese, whether it's done solely with Gotion, again with taxpayer support from Michigan, or doing it in a so-called partnership or a deal with Ford, the end result is the same. It's devastating to our auto industry, our workers, and when you destroy the automobile industry in Michigan, you destroy our economy. And as Mike said, you destroy the community that we know as Michigan.
You may know that last week, Congressman Molinar and Senator Rubio petitioned Secretary Austin to blacklist cattle. So a national security threat and concerns with Gotion exist as they do with cattle. And you see the highest government agencies and others tracking it for a purpose. Again, to the question from the young lady earlier, these are steps that are taking to de-risk and decouple in some instances when it involves military and critical space technologies. But steps need to be done to, on the state level certainly, where there are gaps and CFIUS either ignores or misses, these, and they have missed them in the past involving other industries, not Michigan specific, but we trust that baby steps and hope baby steps through our continued effort will improve the situation.
Thanks. And again, put cattle through CFIUS. That's what I would have done. It won't pass. We know it won't pass. It has clear violations. And we're going to ramp up. This is going to go further as well. I mean, so we're going to say to Chinese companies, if you can't meet Americans' transparency requirements, you're not going to be able to sell on our stock exchange. We're not going to allow them to buy farmland and other land near military installations or candidly anywhere. Because why? You can't do that in China. You shouldn't be able to do it here. This is on a long list of things that we will get done when it comes to parity in China. And the first and foremost has to always be our national security. And so when people who are sent to Washington to safeguard the national security of the United States do this kind of a violation, I hope people need to understand it, and they need to understand what the risk is. Thanks, everybody, for coming out today.